You're listening to Nora and Noah Decode the Day, where markets meet meaning every morning.
You really couldn't miss it this week, could you? All the headlines about this brand new U.S.-UK trade framework.
No, it was everywhere. Big fanfare, lots of talk about a major step forward.
Yeah, the initial buzz definitely made it sound like a huge breakthrough in global trade.
Exactly. Lots of pronouncements about a new chapter starting between the two countries.
So for this deep dive, we want to go beyond just those headlines. We're going to unpack this framework, really look at what's actually in it, what it all means. We've dug into the reports, the expert takes, trying to get past the hype.
Right.
Our mission here is to figure out what this framework really involves, what's still, up in the air, and maybe what it signals for trade negotiations down the line.
Cut through the noise, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Look past the celebratory announcements and get to the practical side. What are the real effects, potentially?
Okay, let's start with the announcement itself. President Trump really presented this as a landmark thing, didn't he?
Oh, absolutely. Historic achievement, I think, was the term used. Right. And framing it as the first step in, like overhauling the whole global economy. Pretty ambitious claims.
Very. And the timing was interesting, too, lining up with the 80th anniversary of VE Day. Seemed very calculated to project, strength and boost his economic message.
And the whole event around it. Had a bit of the theater, didn't it?
You could say that.
The social media lead-up, then Prime Minister Starmer on the phone, supposedly from the Resolute desk, felt quite staged.
It definitely amplified the perceived significance. But, when you look past that presentation, the early talk was about a full and comprehensive agreement, like that big U.S.-UK free trade deal people always discuss.
Right.
But what we actually have is what's called a framework. And that distinction is pretty important.
Okay, so let's unpack that. What is actually in this framework? What specific things were agreed upon?
Well, the main bits seem to be about better access for U.S. goods into the UK market and faster customs clearance for U.S. exports.
Okay, so smoother sailing for American stuff going to the UK.
Basically. And for the UK, there's some mention of relief on duties. Cars, steel, aluminum. But, and this is key, it's described as limited relief.
Limited. Got it. So it sounds like a lot of the tricky stuff is still pending, left for later talks.
That's exactly right. And that's really crucial to understand here. A lot of the really detailed bits that make up a trade relationship still need to be negotiated.
Which is where the expert reactions become really interesting.
They came in pretty fast.
Yeah, I saw that comment from Tim Meyer, the trade law professor. He called it a nothing burger.
Wow. Yeah. Blunt.
Saying it's just a framework, not a real finished agreement.
And that really highlights the gap, doesn't it, between saying you intend to do something and having a legally binding, detailed treaty.
Definitely. But then you had Prime Minister Starmer, who acknowledged, okay, some details still need ironing out, but he still called the whole thing fantastic.
Right. Quite a different framing there. Shows you the different perspectives or maybe the different audiences they're speaking to.
And President Trump, he seemed to just brush off any idea it was overhyped. Said it's a great deal for both parties, and everyone wants deals like this.
Yeah, sticking to the positive message. Peter Navarro, his trade advisor, gave a slightly different angle, though. He talked about moving as fast as you can go without screwing it up.
Suggesting a more cautious step-by-step thing.
Kind of implies that, yeah. And he predicted more deals coming, so maybe this is meant to be the first piece of a bigger puzzle.
It's worth mentioning the markets, too. They seemed okay with it initially on Thursday. Stocks mostly went up.
Yeah, there was a generally positive reaction at first.
Yeah.
But as you dig deeper, some pretty big unresolved issues start popping up.
Right, what got left out? Or maybe just glossed over? Things important to U.S. businesses.
Well, the big one is probably the UK's digital services tax. The one hitting major U.S. tech companies.
Ah, yes, that's been a real bone of contention. And the framework just has a vague promise for a future digital trade deal.
That's about the size of it. Christine Bliss from the Coalition of Services Industries basically said, look, American service providers need fair treatment. That sounds like the problem isn't solved at all.
No, not even close. Leaving a major issue like that hanging kind of raises questions about how much this framework actually does right now.
Exactly. And similar story with Trump's ideas about sweeping pharmaceutical tariffs. Still undecided.
Okay. And farming. I heard the UK dropped tariffs on some U.S. farm goods.
They did on some. But those really strict UK food safety standards, the ones that often cause friction in US-UK talks,
Yeah.
still there, still in place. So another big hurdle remains.
So despite the positive spin, there are still some pretty major obstacles and disagreements lingering.
Definitely. Which probably explains why the overall reaction wasn't, pure celebration.
Which brings us to that market skepticism point.
Mm.
Matthew Ryan over at eBury noted there wasn't really euphoria in the UK markets.
Yeah, he suggested investors aren't seeing this as some kind of game-changing event.
That kind of quiet reaction says a lot, doesn't it?
It really does. Like Ryan said, this is a long way from a full trade agreement. Getting all those other details sorted out could take months, maybe even years.
And then there was that other confusing bit. The conflicting information coming from the US and UK governments themselves.
Right, especially about the steel and aluminum tariffs. That was quite telling.
What happened there exactly?
Well, the UK government put out a statement saying US tariffs on their steel and aluminum would go to zero, eliminated.
Okay.
But then, pretty soon after, the White House statement came out, and it talked about negotiating an alternative arrangement and creating a new trading union for these materials.
Huh. Those sound like very different things than just zero tariffs.
They absolutely do. It suggests that maybe they weren't completely aligned on even some basic points when the announcement was made.
Yeah, doesn't exactly inspire confidence that everything's locked down. This whole framework feels more like, I don't know, setting the stage for more talks rather than closing the deal.
I think that's a good way to put it. It's a basis for further negotiation.
So, stepping back, what does this tell us about the bigger picture? About future U.S. trade talks? About Trump's overall strategy?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? He chose to do a deal, even a limited one, with a country, the UK, that he'd already hit with tariffs, and they came to the table to negotiate after that.
Right, not a situation where they retaliated first.
Exactly. It wasn't about fighting back with tariffs. It was about negotiating in response to them, which makes Professor Meyer's prediction that we might see more of these limited framework announcements seem pretty plausible.
And keeping that 10% baseline tariff on the UK, the same rate he announced back in April. That feels deliberate, right? Like a message.
It certainly could be read that way. A signal to other countries, perhaps, that hoping for rates lower than 10% might be wishful thinking. Trump himself said, we are using tariffs now for our benefit.
And that rates could go even higher than 10% for some countries.
Right. But at the same time, he also signaled he's willing to negotiate on some of those specific sector tariffs, autos, metals, pharma, the ones designed to push companies to produce more in the U.S.
Which could actually upset some of his own more hardline protectionist allies, couldn't it?
Potentially, yeah. It adds a bit of flexibility, but it's flexibility aimed at that onshoring goal. Still, the auto concession for the UK, that lower 10% rate for up to 100,000 vehicles, and the steel aluminum pledge, they do set markers for future talks.
With who?
Yeah.
Like Europe, Japan.
Exactly. Europe, Japan, Korea. Brad Setzer made that point that these could be important precedents.
And the administration is apparently getting ready for talks with China, the main target of all this tariff action, plus ongoing stuff with India, Japan, South Korea.
Yeah, it looks like this UK framework is just one piece on a much bigger chessboard, a trade strategy that's still very much unfolding.
And China talks.
Yeah.
Those are likely to be the toughest, I imagine.
Oh, undoubtedly. Getting any kind of major trade deal with China is going to be incredibly challenging.
Okay, let's just quickly touch on the broader economic situation here. Trump seemed quite keen for a win, didn't he? Poll numbers have been a bit shaky. Concerns about tariffs, maybe destabilizing things, risking recession.
Right. His argument, of course, is that any short-term pain, any disruption, is worth it because it'll eventually lead to more investment back in the U.S.
A gamble, basically.
Well, there are definitely different views on whether that gamble pays off and what the long-term costs might be.
Andrew Bailey, the Bank of England governor, had an interesting take. He welcomed the US-UK deal, but said the real prize, the bigger issue, is cooling things down between the US and China.
Mm-hmm. He hoped the UK deal would be the first of many, but really stressed how crucial that US-China relationship is for everyone.
Yeah, it puts the bilateral deal in perspective, doesn't it?
It really does. It underlines how interconnected everything is. These one-on-one deals matter, sure, but the overall global climate, especially between the two biggest economies, that affects everything.
So if we're wrapping this up, the takeaway seems to be that this US-UK trade framework, it's more like a starting point, an outline, than a finished product.
Yeah, definitely not the comprehensive deal initially hinted at.
It's a step, maybe, but a pretty small one. Lots of big issues still need hashing out. And it might just show us the playbook for future U.S. trade talks. Tariffs first, then maybe negotiate sector by sector.
I think that captures it well. The contrast between the big announcement and the slightly messy reality underneath is pretty stark when you look closely.
It really shows how complex international trade is and how long it can take to turn promises into actual concrete agreements.
Absolutely.
Which leaves us with this final thought for you listening. Thinking about how limited this framework actually is and the conflicting messages around it. What does that really suggest about where global trade might be heading under this kind of approach? And maybe, what should countries be focusing on in their own trade plans going forward? Definitely something to chew on.
That's it for today's Decode. If you found this helpful, make sure to subscribe, and we'll catch you tomorrow, right here on Nora and Noah Decode the Day.